Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that my running mate Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. So it's been 3 weeks or 2 weeks. Well, we had guests the last 2 weeks, so it's been 3 weeks. So I haven't made any comments on current events. And not a lot has changed, but Trump is now a convicted felon. So is Biden's son Hunter. I don't know how much difference that's going to make in the election, but what we've been talking about in the headlines is Israel's unspeakably vicious war crimes and genocide continues in Gaza. The one thing that changed since we last talked about that is that the U.S. sponsored a UN Security Council resolution supporting a ceasefire that passed 14-0 with only Russia abstaining. And Russia said it abstained because the resolution was vague, whatever. I think that shows the Biden administration knows it is paying a political cost at home in the election campaign and internationally by alienating allies as well as foes and neutral countries for its continued support of Israel's atrocities. But the basic ceasefire for hostages and prisoners deal that's on the table, it's not going to be adopted. Both Israel and Hamas are playing politics with it. And Israel in particular, it looks like Netanyahu may start a war with Hezbollah in Lebanon just so he can stay in power. But in any case, the war continues, and we got to keep demanding that the U.S. changes policy and cut off arms to Israel as long as it continues this war and apartheid and its occupation. What has changed in the last 3 weeks is Biden's new horrible executive order for ending asylum for political refugees and the European parliamentary elections, which showed a shift to the right, even if the establishment center continues to hold for now. So I'll get to those things in a minute. Just a word on Ukraine. There's a statement called Ukraine, a people's peace, not an imperial peace, which we'll put the link to in the chat along with the list of the signers. And that was issued by, it's an eco-socialist statement about the future of Ukraine and Europe as a whole. And it was on the occasion of the peace summit that's going on as we speak in Switzerland that Ukraine called. There are 92 countries there. Some countries we would have liked to have shown up didn't send high-ranking people, but like the United States, they got Kamala Harris instead of Joe Biden there. But in other cases, I find it encouraging that Colombia's left-wing president Petro is there. So we'll see what comes out of that. Basically, Ukraine has a 10-point peace proposal, which covers everything from securing the safety of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, exchanging prisoners of war, all the way down to Russia withdrawing from Ukrainian territory. And that's what they're discussing. Putin had a pre-response, if you want to call it that, where he said, yeah, I'm ready to talk about negotiate peace, but here are the conditions. We get all the 4 oblasts we've claimed annexed, as well as Crimea, which they claimed annexed back in 2014, which means Putin's asking for 5% more of Ukraine's territory because Russia doesn't control those 4 oblasts. And then he's ready to talk. That's a non-starter for Ukraine, certainly, and Ukraine asking Russia to withdraw, which they should under international law, is a non-starter for Putin. So that war continues. You hear the narrative, well, Ukraine is losing, it can't win, but put it in a larger context. At one point, right after Russia's full-scale invasion, they had nearly 40% of Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine pushed them back. Russia now has 14%, and he wants 5% more in his negotiating demands. And the front line, despite the shortage of ammunition, which is now being rectified, that the U.S. finally passed its aid package, has pretty much been frozen. Russia's made some incremental gains, but their offensive in the northeast region of Kharkiv is stalled. In fact, is being pushed back. So it's really a stalemate situation. So the idea you hear from some of the pacifists, well, we got to stop the carnage, so compromise the land so more people don't get killed. The problem is the Ukrainian people, the polls show this, overwhelmingly do not want to trade land for so-called peace. They don't trust Putin. They have a long history for that. And they're concerned not just about the land that Russia occupies, but also the people that are being ruled by Russia who don't want to be. So that's going to continue. And there are some developments out of European elections that I'll talk about in a minute. But first, Biden's asylum ban. I mean, he's basically replicating Trump's policy by executive order, even though it's already been struck down from Trump's executive order, and it's going back to the courts. But this measure is just mean-spirited and panders to the far right, which is not appeased. And in fact, they're calling the executive order mass amnesty, which is a total fiction, but that's the far right. And instead of fighting the far right on immigration and other issues, in this one, Biden is again engaged in unprincipled political opportunism. He's echoing the far right's hysteria about a so-called invasion of migrants being a national security issue. And in doing so, he's normalizing the far right's racism, and that strengthens their base. It confirms what they believe. And Biden is making the same mistake that the center-right and center-left political parties in Europe did in adapting to the far right's anti-immigrant policies. And the far right gained in the center-left and center-right by sort of normalizing that position, basically normalized the far right position, and it hurt them in this European election. And it, backfired on them in places like France, Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, where it's legitimized the far right immigrant bashing and actually alienated the progressive voters. So with Democrats like Biden, who needs Republicans like Trump? I mean, we see this on issue after issue. What we should be doing with regard to immigration is demanding more funding and staffing for the asylum system to speed up the processing, clear up the backlogs, and coordinate with companies and local governments that are asking for migrant workers. There are some places in this country where there's short of labor in agriculture and in manufacturing and in construction. And in fact, it's the US itself that is driving record migration in the world today. And this is at an all-time high, 281 million people, 3.6% of the world's people are migrants today. That's 3 times more than the 84 million migrants in 1970. And US policy is promoting the 3 main drivers of migration: war, poverty, and climate change. US backing, military backing and intervention for authoritarian governments. And they do that to enforce neoliberal policies that benefit US-based corporations, creates many political refugees seeking asylum from political repression, and many economic refugees seeking survival and refuge from neoliberal austerity. And the neoliberal policies of privatization, deregulation, cuts to social spending, and authoritarian political repression are demanded by the capitalist managers of global corporations, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, as conditions for loans and direct investment in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, the global South. So that just, it puts those countries in a debt trap, and then they have to be more austere. There are no social programs for people, and they're paying debt instead of investing in their own economies, and then poverty rises and unemployment rises, and then migration rises. So one of the things that we need to understand is that remittances from migrant workers in the global north, basically Europe and North America, to their families still in the global south, those remittances, the money people make and then send to their families back home, are 3 times greater than the combined amount of money going to the global south in the form of governmental foreign aid and corporate foreign direct investment. It's huge. It's very important to the world economy. And that money sent home by migrant workers has increased 6.5 times since the year 2000. It's the biggest anti-poverty program in the world, these remittances. And they're important for maintaining demand in a world economy that is stagnating due to the overproduction generated by capitalist profit seeking in global markets. And immigrant workers are also driving the economic boom and employment and growth in the United States, while the rest of the developed countries, which haven't taken in as many migrants, whether documented or not, they're stuck in a post-pandemic stagnation or even in recession. And studies by the Federal Reserve and Wall Street economists, these vulture capitalists, they agree that all of the net growth since the pandemic in the United States comes because of these migrant workers and the work they do and the growth they create. So immigration is good for jobs and economic growth, but instead of enabling migrants to work where their labor is needed in the United States and the rest of the global north, which helps the economies of both the global south and the global north, right-wing policies in Europe and in the United States are criminalizing migrants. And these policies are not only immoral, they're economically stupid. To the world's 281 million migrant workers, if they were in one country, they'd be the world's fourth largest country after India and China, which each have 1.4 billion, and the United States with 339 million people. That's why we need the Green Party, which is the only political current in the world which has been consistently pro-immigrant. The right, of course, scapegoats immigrants, but so do the center-left parties like the Democrats here, the Social Democrats in Europe, and even one of the far-left parties, the Die Linke, the left in Germany, which is split over the immigration question, as well as cultural issues like LGBTQ rights and rights for trans people. So that's, the Greens are playing an important role in world politics on that. And the Green Party needs to be that party that defends immigrants' human rights, makes the case for legalizing instead of criminalizing immigration, and allows workers to move where they are needed and political refugees to find asylum in our democracy and other democracies. And the Green Party needs to be the party that organizes these hundreds of millions of migrants worldwide into a political force that can speak and act on its own behalf for their human rights. The Green Party is the only one that aspires to do that, and it's something that we can do. And it's a lot of people, and they have needs, and we should be the ones to organize them. And the other thing I want to talk about is the results of these European parliamentary elections. Overall, the center right won; they got the biggest vote, and the far right gained. It's got a lot of attention, but overall, their vote only went up 2%. But all the currents on the left lost seats. The left group in the Euro Parliament, the Green group, the Social Democratic group, as did the liberal pro-business group. But the Greens were the biggest losers, losing 20 seats, almost a third of their seats that they won in 2019. So the center-right Christian Democratic type parties still hold the largest bloc in the Euro Parliament, with the center-left Social Democrats in second place, even though they lost some seats. So the center bloc of center-right and center-left will maintain a slightly but reduced working majority of about 407 seats in the 720-member European Parliament. That means the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who is a German moderate conservative in the mold of Angela Merkel. She's in the same party, the Christian Democrats. She's likely to be elected the European Commission president. So overall, the politics in the Euro Parliament aren't going to change that much, although the right is a little stronger. But the results varied a lot by states, and I want to go into some of them. In Germany, the Greens and the Social Democrats lost big, and the fascist Alternative for Democracy for Deutschland increased its vote from 11% in 2019 to 16.5% this year, and actually came in second place behind the Christian Democrats, but ahead of the Social Democrats. So the alternative for Deutschland now has more seats in the European Parliament than the Social Democratic Party. The Greens, which are the second biggest party in the current governing coalition in Germany, fell from 20.5% 5 years ago to 12% in this election. So it was not good for the Greens in Germany. In France, this is where the right really gained. It was Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally. They crushed the President Emmanuel Macron's Renew Europe slate, which only got 15%, less than half of the 32% that the far-right national rally got. So that prompted Macron to dissolve the French parliament and call snap elections, which are going to be held in a few weeks. And that's a huge risk for Macron because, Le Pen's national rally could really increase its share of the seats in the French parliament and just shift the politics into at least a stagnation with Macron still president. He'll be there for another 3 years, but the parliament will shift to the right. The Greens in France, really, they lost all their seats. They only got 5%. But in response to this, and in the call for a new election, the Greens, the Socialists, the Communists, and the far left France Unbowed around Jean-Luc Mélenchon, my French is terrible, but he's the leader of the French Unbowed. They formed a coalition they call the Popular Front. And if their current vote holds, they'll get 35 to 40% in the new parliament. What's interesting there is with respect to Ukraine, the French Popular Front in their platform, I just heard about this in a discussion of that statement that we put in the chat, Ukraine, a people's peace, not an imperial peace. The French Popular Front election manifesto just came out, and it's very strong on supporting Ukraine, including arms to Ukraine, which the communists and France Unbowed had opposed before. So that's a significant change, I think. And also, and I got this out of this discussion I was just on, it was a Zoom call with about 50 people, mostly across Europe and Ukraine, some Russian exiles on the left. And they observed that where parties or candidates who called themselves left opposed aid to Ukraine and solidarity with Ukraine lost. Mary Daly and Mick Wallace, who are independents, independent leftists, if you want to call them that, in Ireland lost. And in Spain, the left party that was opposed to supporting Ukraine lost big. And Syriza, which is a mixed bag, but they were supporting solidarity with Ukraine, gained at the expense of this left party. So it's interesting how that played out. Now, the last Popular Front of Socialists and Communists implemented New Deal reforms in France in the 1930s before the Nazis invaded and took over with Vichy France. And the Socialists are the largest bloc in this Popular Front coalition. They received 14% in this election. That's kind of a resurrection for the dead, from the dead for the Socialists, who were really wiped out in 2019. So the center is not holding in France, where the right has really risen, but the left has come together in a coalition. So we'll see what happens in these elections in a couple of weeks. In Italy, the neo-fascist party of the populist Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, won 28% of the vote, doubling its representation. So there's a move to the right in Italy. In Hungary, Viktor Orban's authoritarian and kleptocratic Fidesz party won 45%, the largest vote, but it was down 10% from the last election. And a new opposition party, Respect and Freedom, came in with 30%. And Respect and Freedom is a big tent party that's united around anti-corruption, anti-kleptocracy. So it encompasses positions on social and economic issues from Christian Democrats on the right to Social Democrats on the left. And that's what probably hurt the independent left in Hungary, which was an alliance of Green and Social Democratic parties. Their share of the vote declined from 23% in 5 seats in 2019 to just 8% in 2 seats this year. And then a far right party, even to the right of Orban, gained a seat. So the takeaway may be that the Hungarians are getting a bit tired of Orban's corruption and autocracy, and that opposition party may give him a run for his money in the presidential elections coming up in 2026, in 2 years. And the Greens and the left still have a voice, but they are an embattled minority in that socially conservative country. In Poland, the governing Civic Coalition, which is a pro-EU moderate party, maintained its lead over the nationalist extremist right. So that's pretty much status quo. In the Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, as well as Spain, the far right lost ground to the Greens and Social Democrats. In fact, in Finland, the Eco-Socialist Left Alliance won 17%, and it was at the expense of the far right Finland, which won 7%, which was half of what they won in 2019, 14%. And in the Netherlands and in Denmark, the left Greens and the Labor or Social Democratic parties won. So it wasn't all the loss everywhere. In the Nordic countries and in Netherlands, they gained. And in fact, in the Netherlands, the alliance of the left Greens and Labor won 8 seats, beating the far right party of Geert Wilders, who's an anti-immigrant right-winger. He only won 7 seats. And we got UK elections coming up. I'll leave that alone for now. I don't want to go on for too long. But just to sort of analyze this, the center holds for now, but why the drift to the right? And I think there are 3 issues at stake. One is the immigration question. The right has been successfully mobilized, or has successfully mobilized, resentment against immigrants among a pretty wide swath of the populations there. And only the Greens have been consistently pro-immigrant, but it cost them politically because they are isolated by the ambivalence and division on this question by the Social Democratic and far left parties. So that hurt the Greens, but doesn't mean they shouldn't hold that position. Second reason is neoliberal austerity and privatization. The working class has left the Social Democrats and the Greens, who have helped govern the transition from a strong welfare state to neoliberalism. And that's been going on for a few decades. And those chickens are coming home to roost. The exception is Scandinavia, where the welfare state protections have mostly been maintained. And the Social Democrats and the Greens generally are doing okay there. And then the third issue is climate, where the right is, I'm like jumping around on my screen. I hope y'all can hear me. The working class, on climate, the right has been mobilizing working people and small business people, including farmers, against climate action, saying it's costing people. And the Greens are associated with climate action. And without just transition policies, more, stronger welfare policies that they've abandoned for neoliberalism to protect working people, climate is going to continue to hurt the Greens without a green transition policy. So I think, what we should draw from this is that even if, say, on immigration, it's not popular to be pro-immigrant now, you have to make your case. And in the long run, good policy is good politics. And the Greens and the Socialist Party should not have compromised with the right on neoliberalism, immigration in the case of the Social Democrats, and climate. They've been, in trying to tamp down this criticism from the far right, which the center right has picked up. The Greens and the Socialist parties have moderated their demands on climate. So we have to convince people with good policy and defeat the right with good policy, not compromising with them like Biden does. And the crisis of the radical left is international. And, we've got to stick to our guns and keep organizing, because good policy in the end is going to beat out opportunistic politics. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to your questions and answers. And I hope this internet connection is working well, because I'm on my screen jumping around looking at myself. Vicky Corden. It is unfortunate the far right is gaining traction in Europe also. It's like a cancer spreading around the world. Yeah, and the thing I'd underscore is that we cannot compromise with the far right. Like Biden trying to do bipartisanship with the party that tried to overthrow his election and said his election was rigged. You got to just defeat these people with good policy and good organizing. Trying to compromise with them and moderate them, it's just not going to work. And it's a problem in Europe. It's a problem here. It's a problem with the left. I mean, and I don't mean just the green left and the, still socialist left, but I'm thinking more about the liberal, what we call liberal, the social democrats in Europe, the Democrats here. Their liberal wings are compromising with the right, or at least their mainstream. I'm thinking the Democrats here, their leadership compromises with the right. There is a small group of maybe 25 members of Congress, the left wing of the Progressive Caucus of Congress, which pretty much stick to their guns, but they need more support. And if the Democrats continue to behave like they are, the right is going to keep getting stronger. Z Manny, hi, what are your thoughts on Mexico's recent election? I'm still trying to absorb it. I know that Sheinbaum has a background as a climate scientist, but she also is a pretty loyal follower of AMLO, who the guy that just came out, and I can't always remember his four names, but those are his initials, AMLO. And the thing that concerns me is that really two things. One is that while she gets climate change, she helped co-author some of the International Panel on Climate Change reports. She's also committed to expanding the fossil fuel sector in Mexico as a matter of economic development, which is not where the world needs to go. And the other thing is, concerning the independence of the judiciary and the powers of local and state governments in Mexico, seems to be a trend toward centralization and authoritarianism that AMLO started, and I don't know if Sheinbaum is going to resist that. Of course, she was a better alternative than the remnants of the old establishment, the Revolutionary Institutional Revolutionary Party, and the PAN, which was the right-wing party. They coalesced to try to beat her, but she beat them, handily, something like 60-40. So, that is where Mexico's going. It's going in a progressive direction. The question is whether the leadership is going to take them in a really, small d democratic direction, or whether it's going to still be, as most states are, basically dealing with, the capitalist power of these big corporations, the big financial institutions. So that's about as much as I can say at this point. I do want to, get a better understanding of the political reforms that AMLO proposed and Sheinbaum seems to be committed to, which I've heard criticized by both, some establishment people in the U.S., but also the far left in Mexico is anti-democratic. Scout Trooper 164. How do you feel with the new U.S. sanctions hitting Russian exchanges? This feels like it will hurt far worse than the other sanctions. Yeah, and I'm not a real up on how international currency exchanges work, but I did see Russians queued up to change their rubles into dollars. I think the ruble went down and the dollar went up after these sanctions went in. Russia has moved closer to China in finding ways to pay for trade. One of the things I got out of this discussion with these European leftists in solidarity with Ukraine is that Switzerland, particularly, but generally, Germany is another state where the sanctions have as many holes as Swiss cheese. And what these corporations are doing, what the banks in Switzerland are doing, for example, in Switzerland has sanctions on Russia, so the companies set up subsidiaries, and Dubai, places like that, and continue trade as before. And there was 80% of Russia's oil and minerals are being traded through Swiss financial institutions, but they just moved uh, that activity to Dubai, which means Switzerland can't hold them responsible under Swiss law. They can only hold them responsible if they do it from Swiss territory. So the sanctions, and that shows that the commitment of the West, the capitalists get more attention than the Ukrainians. So, another thing mentioned, a lot of German companies still have assets in Russia, and they don't want to impose sanctions and stop trading with Russia because they're afraid to lose their assets in Russia. So, capitalists put money before human rights. So that's a big problem with sanctions. Um, and then you have to ask yourself, well, why do we slowly squeeze in, the sanctions into, a tighter sanctions regime? Why didn't we do this from the start? And I think it has to do with there's a lot of business interests that would really just like to go back to business as usual with Russia. They don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about ordinary people. They just want to make money. So sanctions, I've had on this program Svetlana Romanko with Razum We Stand, which is a group in Ukraine that is pushing for tighter oil, gas, and coal sanctions on Russia to stop financing the war, and also pushing for a reconstruction of Ukraine's energy system around renewables, which now, given that Russia in the last few months has wiped out something like 80 or 90% of their electric generating capacity, basically their hydro dams and their thermal plants, which are mostly coal, some natural gas. All they have left that they're producing are the nukes. God help us if Russia wants to put them out with bombs. And the renewables, the solar and wind, which is distributed. You can't take them out with one missile, or a few missiles, like you can a power plant. So, the Ukraine is facing a difficult winter. In fact, the Ukrainians on the call that I was just on, the power went out while they're on the call. They had to go to their batteries to stay on the call and make their presentations. And they have, power blackouts every day in Ukraine. And the heat this winter may not come on, which is going to be, very difficult, as cold as it can get in Ukraine in the winter. That's why there needs to be a crash program to build renewable energy in the form of solar panels, wind generators right now, and then heat pumps to replace, gas-fired heating, or they have district heating. Some of that's coal-fired with heat pumps that you get the heat from the air or the ground. A heat pump is like a refrigerator in reverse. So it pushes the cold air out and keeps the warm air. That's what Ukraine needs. And, I've been looking to see, there's been some discussion. There's a guy named Simon Pirani, who is a longtime socialist and ecologist who writes a lot about energy policy, the Green New Deal, and also solidarity with Ukraine. And he just had a paper out, describing what I just described in more detail. He has a blog called People and Nature, and I don't have the link with me, but you can Google that and read his article. There's a real energy crisis in Ukraine thanks to Russian bombing of civilian infrastructure, for which 2 top Russian military commanders have been issued arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. And that was just for the destruction they did last winter, not the winter we just went through, but the one last year. And those bombings targeted substations and transmission lines, not so much the thermal and hydro plants like they did this year. So the devastation this year is worse. Ukraine was able to, put those transmission lines back together and the substations back together and, survived last winter and did okay during the summer. Now every day they have blackouts. They can only provide so much electricity. Europe should also provide more electricity over the grid to Ukraine, but that's a bigger concern. I think, than what's going on the front lines. Because now that the Ukrainians have the artillery they need and other weapons, the Russians are not making the advances they were in that window when U.S. arms were blocked by the Republicans. So the energy crisis is what's going to make it real difficult for Ukrainians. So that's the opposite of sanctions. That's aid, and I don't know what the West is doing about that. There hasn't been a lot of reporting. I hope there is soon, because besides air defense to protect their infrastructure, that's what the Ukrainians need just to survive this next winter. See, Manny, thoughts on Saudi Arabia not renewing the petrodollar agreement and likely impact on the dollar? I'm not familiar with exactly what you're talking about. I know, historically, and this goes back to the energy crisis in the 70s, the U.S. told Saudi Arabia, okay, fine, you and OPEC can raise the oil price, but you got to recycle the dollars we spend for that oil back into the U.S. economy. And I think that's what's been going on since. I don't know if of a particular, like trade agreement. But the impact, I think what Saudi Arabia is doing, like a lot of countries are doing, is diversifying their options for trade rather than relying totally on the dollar, which is still the dominant currency, and I don't think is in threat of not being the dominant currency anytime soon. But on the other hand, it is the diversification is weakening the standing or the total dominance of the dollar, and that has long-term implications. So unless there's a particular agreement, in writing that I'm not familiar with, I think you're referring to the fact that they're diversifying, their trade into other currencies, and I expect that's not with the United States, but with other countries. One of the things about the sanctions on Russia is now Russia's doing a lot of its trade in Chinese yuan, a lot more than it used to. So yeah, the international monetary system is in transition, but some people say the dollar is going to crash and the whole thing's going to change. I don't see that, and I read the financial press, when that's on that subject, or left-wing radical political economists like Patrick Bond in South Africa, and their analysis is, yeah, there's diversification of the currencies in which some countries are trading, but it doesn't threaten the dominance of the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. Face Slayer 202, Nathaniel Gregory. Have you heard about the House passing the Selective Service Bill? What would be your action against this if passed in the Senate? So they passed the draft bill? I missed that too. Well, I'm kind of a mixed feeling on this. I when I've been running statewide, I've run into the former congressman from Harlem. Oh God, he's a Korean War veteran, Charlie Rangel, and he makes the case that if we had an army of people that were drafted, a civilian army, we'd be less likely to go to war. Like during Vietnam, the soldiers' revolt, that was part of it. In the Marine Corps, we were not reliable to go fight in Vietnam anymore. And that's why Nixon and Kissinger had to do what they call Vietnamization, which was just aid to the South Vietnamese army, which really didn't work from their point of view. So that's one side. On the other side, I don't like the state coming in and telling you what to do. And then my question is this a universal service proposal where military is one, but you can do, domestic services as another option for your service obligation? I would feel better about that. So I've had a mixed feeling about this since talking to Charlie Rangel a couple times, because and this was a guy, I think he titled his autobiography "Lucky to Be Alive" or something. He survived the Korean War and really, strong anti-war person. But he always wanted to bring the draft back because he thought it would deter the U.S. from uh, so quickly going off to war and intervening in other countries. Via email, comments on recent CODIS decisions, bump stocks, firing union organizers, uh, the abortion pill is another one. And let's see, the firing of union organizers. I think there's been, I may be getting it mixed up with the NLRB ruling. But I think the Supreme Court decision, makes it harder for people at places like Amazon and Starbucks to organize. And it's not surprising from this conservative court. The bump stocks thing, I haven't read the details, but I guess it overturned, I think it was an executive order, or maybe it was passed by Congress when the Republicans had it, against bump stocks, which turned semi-automatic into automatic weapons, and was in response to one of I think it was the Las Vegas massacre by a shooter. But and I haven't read the news on this closely. I think that one is going to go back into the courts, and I have no idea which way it's going to go. And then the same thing with the abortion pill. The court didn't ban it; that was unanimous. But there are more cases coming, and I've just read the summaries. It could come back, and the court could get rid of abortion pills, which is. These people on the right talk about freedom, but they're taking away freedoms. I think Jill Stein commented on that in one of her fundraising messages this week, and she said, in her platform, and I support this, they want to expand the court immediately to 18, and then in order to balance it out again, and then have 18-year term limits, and then stagger the terms so that unless somebody dies in office while their term is going on, you have every year an opportunity to appoint a new justice, which means it would rotate between presidents instead of what we had that created this conservative court where the Republicans, with the speaker from Kentucky, Mitchell, oh God, I'm blanking on names today. Anyway, he wouldn't let Merrick Garland go through. That was the Obama appointment. And then a couple years later, there was a late, and the excuse was, well, we can't appoint somebody in the same year as an election. Merrick Garland was nominated in something like March, and they just held off for that whole year. And then the appointment that Trump made was in September, and they rushed it through. And that's how Trump was able to complete the takeover of the Supreme Court by the right. So these reforms that Jill Stein is proposing, I think, are good. 18-year term limits, and then immediately increase the court to 18 members. And that would take away the right-wing grip on the court. Yeah, Chris, the decision making it hard to get protections for union organizing activity was a 9-0 decision. The Dems are just going to nominate right-wing justices too. Yeah, particularly on economic issues, not so much on social issues. I remember when Nader was running in 2000, or maybe it was 2004, and the Democrats were saying, "Oh, he's going to enable the Republicans to appoint conservative justices." But there was a study by Fordham. It was published in the Fordham Law Review, Fordham, University Law School Review, and it showed that the appointments got more conservative under Clinton than they were under Bush and Reagan. So the Democrats are already pushing the court to the right. So that's true. That's why we need to start electing Greens. At least we need to start with the House. That's where we get a foothold. And we got to push for ranked choice voting and proportional representation so we get our fair share of representation. But yeah, I mean, Jill Stein's reforms are good, but they're necessary but not sufficient. Let's put it that way. Lively Fern 59. What are your thoughts about a known insurrectionist Trump going before Congress? I'm not sure what you mean by going before Congress. I know he was just down there meeting with the GOP members of the Congress. I don't know what are you saying? He gets elected and he has to give a State of the Union address. I don't think a known insurrectionist like Trump should be elected president. I'll put it that way. So unless there's another thing I'm not aware of, I'm not sure what you mean by going before Congress. But yeah, Trump is bad news any way you look at it. See, Manny, is there talk of repealing the Clinton immigration bill, which had a huge impact on the rate of detention since it turned civil immigration infractions into criminal status? I don't hear any talk, except when I say we should legalize immigration instead of criminalizing it. I'm not hearing a bill that's being pushed by the progressives in Congress. Not that they have any hope of getting it passed in the current composition of the Congress, nor do I hear a bill being pushed in the elections, like, say, Medicare for All, although that bill keeps getting weaker. So, yeah, I think that's an issue that Greens can certainly raise. And, it's a point against the Democrats. They made immigration criminal affair rather than just a civil violation. And that, that had an impact on the rate of detention. It's like criminalizing people for using drugs instead of offering them treatment if they're abusing drugs. It's the same kind of law and order mentality. And the Democrats, what has been Biden's response after the Black Lives Matter George Floyd demonstrations in 2020? It's been to give lip service to a George Floyd police reform bill that did pass the House but couldn't pass the Senate because they wouldn't touch the filibuster. And then adding more money in the federal budget to fund more police in the cities and local governments, instead of putting money into things that will reduce crime, because it reduces the underlying conditions of crime and economic insecurity, poverty, and inequality. I don't think we should underestimate that, because there's a lot of studies on this that the more unequal a society is, the less solidarity it has. So people don't have the moral qualms about crime, whether they're really poor or whether they just want to, like Donald Trump, steal to get ahead. Live at Firm 59. Howie, I don't know if neurodiversity is a big priority for you, but since I am an autistic man, what exactly will the Greens be able to do to help those with mental and learning difficulties, such as autism? Well, we need to fully fund the public schools, including programs that address people with neurodiversity. And I think that's one place. And then we got to deal with anti-discrimination law and law enforcement. Those are the kinds of things I talked about in 2020. I'm trying to remember if there was other aspects of policy that need to be addressed. So yeah, I did run on. I did issue some statements in 2020, and you can probably Google them off my website, howiehawkins.us, where I said more in detail what I just outlined. But yeah, I mean, diversity is a good way to put it because you say mental and learning difficulties. Um, there are difficulties doing it the way most people do it, but other people do it other ways. I'm thinking now of people with dyslexia. Um, it's not that they can't read; it's that they gotta, read in a different way. So I think we need to accommodate all learning styles and capacities in our public education and in the way we treat people in the marketplace, at jobs, and so forth. Access to housing, healthcare, and all of that. Ashley R., piggybacking on that, Lively Fern 59. How do the Greens plan to expand disability services in regards to immigration? I think you mean immigration. Disabled people all around the world have a much harder time moving to safer places. Yeah, that's definitely true. You can see that in the refugee crises in Sudan, Syria, Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere. Um, I think besides what we offer in the United States, we should be putting a lot more money into, and this can come out of the military budget, into humanitarian aid. I've said this often. I got the phrase from Ralph Nader. The U.S. should be the world's humanitarian superpower, not its military policeman. And what I add to that is that's how we make friends instead of enemies around the world and create the basis for peace. So disabled people and people need they need water, clean water. They need basic housing. They need basic preventive health care. They need food in so many places around the world. We should be the humanitarian superpower. Like there's no excuse why the people starving in the Sudan, which is many more than are starving in Gaza, that fund that the UN set up, it's something like $10 billion and it's only got 1 billion, something like that. The US should be able to provide all of that. And sorry about that interruption. I got to turn off the phone. Here we go. So yeah, we should be the world's superpower instead of its, armed gendarme. And disability services is one of many things the U.S. could provide and win friends instead of make enemies. Face layer 202, Nathaniel Gregory. Out of curiosity, do you believe in abolishing the Supreme Court for having too much power, other than expand it? I think the Supreme Court needs to be reined in. Congress actually can regulate the Supreme Court if you read the Constitution. We do need a court to rule as a final court of appeals in the United States on various issues. So I don't have a problem with that. My problem is that it has usurped for itself legislative roles. The conservatives always say we're just going to interpret the law and not make it, but they go out of their way to make it. And that's where Congress can intervene by imposing an ethics standard or taking away certain decisions. Like, they can't make decisions on issues that affect human rights. Those that, we've established, they stand. And they can't overrule Congress as easily as they often do on legislation, claiming it's unconstitutional. We had that problem in the 30s where the court was saying, these New Deal programs were unconstitutional intervention in the economy. And, they had their specious arguments, but then after you had all the strike activity from 1934 on, Supreme Court decided they better, give the labor movement some rights or it's going to be revolution. That's basically what they were worried about. So what happens outside the court affects what happens inside the court. And that includes Congress, but it also includes us out on the street. So we should never feel powerless before the court. We can change the politics of this country, and the court will tend to reflect that. Although these right wingers are pretty, thick-headed and committed to their far right positions, but there's some, like I think Roberts, who has his finger to the political winds, and his concern is to make sure the court doesn't lose all legitimacy. So we can't have an influence, and we shouldn't underestimate our ability to do that. See, Manny, impressive how the public is finally realizing what a huge electoral resource the Green ballot is. I see Greens have almost 100 candidates running now. Everyone's talking about how Greens stand out. Yeah, I think, Cornel West certainly underestimated it. He's going to not be on many ballots. And a lot of the so-called left, like I'm thinking of DSA now, they think their only option is to, run Democrats, run more progressive Democrats in primaries, and then they lose them, and they got to support a corporate Democrat, and they call themselves socialists. It's pretty silly. They're defeating themselves. So hopefully in this election, more people on the progressive side of things will see that. 100 candidates is good, but it's not as good as we've done in the past. But hopefully we're back on the upswing. I think between the push of Trump and the pull of Bernie Sanders into the Democratic Party, we took a beating since 2016. But now that Biden is being so disappointing to Democrats, a lot more people are looking to the Greens again. So, but like I always say, our best way of getting support is to build political bases starting locally. Win people to local city councils and mayors. And that's the foundation for some of those people running for the state legislature, and then from there to the House. And it doesn't have to take that long. I mean, once people see you for a couple of years in a position, and then an opportunity opens up at the next level, people will be ready to vote for you. And so I think we could be doing a lot better at that. And the left generally could be doing a lot better than that, because what's been going on for decades is the left doesn't pay attention to electoral politics till the election is upon them, and then they react to what's offered. They don't think about how can we get our own people in there and run our own people and win. And that's what the Greens have been trying to do. It's got the ballot lines. It's where the left ought to go to advance. And so I hope the public you're talking about, Zimani, is seeing what you're seeing. Nobody's polled on that question exactly, how much the Greens standing in the general electorate is today compared to what it was before. You look at the national polls, and Jill Stein's between 1% and 3%. I think a poll I saw, a combination of, I think by 538 or that other one, Real Clear Politics, showed I think Jill at 1.5% on average, and Cornel West at 1.5%, something like that. You wish it would be a lot higher. And I think it would be if Trump and the MAGA Republicans weren't in the mix, and we have a winner-take-all system. It makes it real tough for us. That's why I keep coming back to, we got to keep getting ranked choice voting, particularly proportional ranked choice voting in our cities, in our states. Ranked choice voting is going to be on the ballot in definitely in Oregon and Nevada, probably Colorado, possibly Idaho and Montana and DC. So I think I'm right about Montana. Anyway, half a dozen states. And if they pass in all of them, which is something we can hope for, we've won 27 straight ballot initiatives regarding ranked choice voting. It's going to begin to change the nature of politics in this country and open up space for the Greens. So I keep coming back to that. This is something we all should be working on in our cities and states. Andrew Hager, pardon me for prying, Howie, but what's that symbol on your shirt? Oh, this is uh, this is the Teamsters logo. I'm a retired Teamster now. Here, if I can get it up, there you go. It's just my union, Local 317. And that's an hour. Wow, went fast. Let's see. What's coming up is next Saturday. I have a Ukrainian socialist feminist named Daria Saburova, who's out with a new book. The English translation is in French. The English translation is Workers of the Resistance. Uh, the Ukrainian working classes face war. And it's about how people in Kryvyi Rih, which is in a coal mining, steel making, industrial working class town, it's where Zelensky's from, how they've responded to the invasion. And it's interesting because a lot of those people are Russian speaking. They didn't support the Maidan revolution, but they're very active in the resistance to the Russian invasion. She spent 3 months there interviewing people. She herself is originally from Kiev. She's teaching and getting a PhD at a university in France now. But um, it's a new book. It's out, and I wanted her to come on and talk about this peace summit in Switzerland this weekend, but she said she's not following it closely enough. So I'll give a brief summary, and then we'll talk with Daria Saburova, who I've seen in other webinars. She's very sharp and clear. Her English is better than mine. And then the week after that, we'll have two Ukrainian Greens. I'm sorry, Georgian Greens, to talk about the crisis, the history of the Green Party in Georgia, which has been up and down and up, hopefully up now, and the election coming up in Georgia after this foreign agents law passed, and where that crisis is at now. So that'll be June 29th. And then we got some candidates running for office, one of these 100 that somebody mentioned. And, that may be, I don't know when July 4th is, but we're going to pick a day soon after these other two guests. So that's what's coming up. And so we'll be here next week, same time. And thanks for being here. And, keep hope alive, as somebody said, because one of the things that concerns me as I go around is people feel, powerless and depressed. But the fact is, we do have power. We just got to exercise it. And when we work together, we do have a lot of power and make a difference. So, keep plugging away. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.